Would you ever trust a company that went through 7 bankruptcies? Yeah, didn't think so. But what if I told you this company is now the modern symbol of wealth and status? Sounds crazy, doesn't it? The brand I'm talking about is none other than the Aston Martin. So how exactly did James Bond's favourite toy with its own Formula One team go from selling 5 cars a week to pulling itself out of mountains of debt to generating over £1 billion in revenue in 2021? Sit tight, relax, and grab yourself a vodka martini. Shaken, not stirred. Chapter 1. Humble Beginnings. Okay, let's start right from the very beginning. Aston Martin was founded in the year 1913 by Lionel Martin and Robert Bamford under the name Bamford and Martin. Both these men used to build and service cars for a living, so it's safe to say the company had a very humble origin story. Want to know the funny part? They didn't even make any original cars at the time. The company was created by Bamford and Martin so they could sell cars made by Singer, the motor car company. However, Martin wasn't one to let his current lifestyle restrict him, and he enjoyed racing on this particular area known as the Aston Hill Climb. The name's making a lot more sense now, isn't it? Anyway, Martin had made a special car using an existing engine and chassis and decided to race it at a competition held in 1914. He saw the benefits of his skills to create a race car and got to work with Bamford immediately. 1 year later, the first ever Aston Martin car was built and registered by the duo. This model was called the Coal Scuttle, and things were about to kick off in grand style. The only thing is, there was a major world event that broke out around this time. Chapter 2. World War I, the French Grand Prix and the name change. The First World War took everyone by storm, and as expected, Martin and Bamford were affected too. Production had to stop because Martin rushed off to the Admiralty and Bamford was sent to the Army Service Corps. Luckily, both men survived their service and found a new spot to make their latest car designs. However, Bamford retired from the company in 1920, so Martin took everything upon himself from this point forward. Luckily, he didn't have to wing it solo for too long because the company got a fresh round of funding from Count Louis Zborowski soon after the breakup. This revitalized the production process, and soon enough, Martin was looking at the big leagues. In 1922, Bamford and Martin manufactured cars which competed in the French Grand Prix. If that wasn't enough already, these cars went on to break all kinds of records, most notably the world speed and endurance records at the Brooklands Motors Racing Circuit. There were 3 models that were used for racing and breaking these records, all of them initially being named as per their chassis numbers. However, they eventually got nicknames like the Green Pea, the Razorblade Record Car and the Halford Special. All in all, these cars broke 10 records, and you'd imagine this was the start of something special. However, that wasn't to be the case, as the company only produced and sold 55 cars between 1920 and 1924. This led to bankruptcy number 1, and they were rescued by Dorothy Lady Charmwood, a politician and philanthropist. It was a brief moment of relief for the car manufacturer, but the problems never really went away. Not even a full year later, in 1925, the company went bankrupt again, and Martin had no other choice but to sell his share in the company. He ended up selling it to Lady Charmwood herself, along with a couple of other investors, the most notable of whom was Augustus Bertelli. It was at this very point where the company was finally renamed to Aston Martin Motors. Chapter 3. Bertelli's reign, World War II, and the introduction of David Brown. Bertelli wasn't just an investor in Aston Martin, he also served as the technical director and designer of the company from 1926 to 1937. During this time, he designed all the Aston Martin cars, which are now famously known as the Bertelli cars. The configurations of these models were heavily leaning towards being super fast racing cars. On top of that, Bertelli was also a highly competent racer himself, and he took the brand name to further prominence with his LM team, which went to the Le Mans racing circuit and even finished 3rd at this Formula One competition. It did earn them some brownie points, but the balance sheet had a different story to tell. Aston Martin was wrecked with financial difficulties once again, and in 1932 they had to appeal to Lance Prix d'Aubrun to bail them out of bankruptcy. His efforts lasted all but a year, as he had to shift his burden to Sir Arthur Sunderland. This wasn't a good look for the brand, so Aston Martin figured they should focus on a broader niche. They gave it a shot by making road cars, but barely produced 700 of them till they were hit with World War II. This was bad news for the company as they had to shift all their production activities to making airplane components for fighter jets during the war. Looks like I found a genuine connection between Aston Martin and Ray-Ban. Anyway, the war was a major economic hindrance, but luckily for Aston Martin, their cars managed to charm a certain man going by the name of David Brown, a hardcore car and motorsports enthusiast. He basically had a vision to make cars specifically for racing, and that's what eventually led him to bail Aston Martin out of bankruptcy and take ownership of the company in 1947. Once he did this, David brought his own expertise into play and helped them design an atom-based racing car. The model turned out to be a huge success for the company, and it took it to new, unimaginable heights. The Atom car surpassed everyone's expectations when it finished in first place after the 24-hour race at Spa in Belgium, 1949. As you'd imagine, the public wanted to get their hands on the Atom car, but David didn't want to become a mass seller. Instead, he opted to create only 15 replicas of the model for those driving on the road. Regardless, this collection became iconic and has been retrospectively named as DB1, coming from David's initials. Because the DB1 became an icon for desirability, David shifted his focus to the DB2, which also focused on the style quotient of the car. Over 400 replicas of this model were manufactured for general sale, which is a big deal considering David also wanted to create the DB2 as the car which could win him the Le Mans. This signalled a revolutionary era, and Aston Martin experienced one of its most successful periods under David's leadership. He eventually collaborated with Italian designers and created cars that the Britishers considered to be a highlight of their culture. How could this get any better? Oh yeah, Aston Martin then partnered with the one and only Carroll Shelby, who went on to win them the Le Mans in 1959 using the DBR1 model. This very same model would later be sold at Sotheby's auction in 2017 for over $22.5 million. Well, there was something even bigger right around the corner, both in terms of success and failure. Chapter 4: James Bond and Victor Gauntlett. In 1964, a little movie by the name of Goldfinger came along, and highlighting it was James Bond's latest spy car, the DB5. This was a huge deal for Aston Martin because the 007 era was at its peak during this time, and the general audience began associating their favourite spy with a car that was already hot in the market. You'd imagine that sales would have catapulted from this moment forward, but something really weird happened. Aston Martin dropped the whole idea of being a public icon and focused on the car industry, which was going through a rough patch during this period. It was seen as a modern approach at the time, but in hindsight, this was a terrible strategy that killed all the momentum they generated from Goldfinger. To be honest, the only alignment with 007 that came from this decision was the 7 bankruptcies. Anyway, between 1972 and 1981, Aston Martin had several changes in ownership, and it all led to a huge pile of problems. And if that wasn't complicated enough, in came an additional investor by the name of Alan Curtis, who ended up taking a 42% stake in the company. There were new marketing strategies, varied PR campaigns and increased prices, but nothing was working out for the automotive giant. At the end of it all, both Sprague and Curtis declared that they never had any long-term plans for Aston Martin in the first place. With this latest plot twist, we come to the next big owner, Victor Gauntlett. Under his leadership, Aston Martin had a more practical approach and focused on creating the right buzz for its brand. Victor didn't really have the best start, because in 1982, the company hit a record low when they only produced 30 cars during the entire year. However, that was primarily because of the wretched market conditions, and he prevailed soon after. Victor had already revived an old Aston Martin collaboration with the Zagato styling house, which led to the creation of some amazing classics for the brand during this period. However, the most important contribution that Victor might have made for Aston Martin was negotiating its return to the James Bond film series. At this point, the days of Sean Connery were long gone, and Roger Moore was finally retired. So there was an additional risk in associating the new 007 with an Aston Martin car. Would the public have accepted Timothy Dalton as Britain's most famous spy? Victor didn't care about such questions, and he immediately sent a Vantage model in pre-production to be used for the shooting of The Living Daylights, which was released in 1987. While the movie was a moderate hit which only improved its reputation over time, Aston Martin didn't get the kind of traction they were looking for. Chapter 5: Ford takes the steering wheel. As passionate as Victor might have been for Aston Martin, there was only so much he could do to keep the brand afloat. Financial problems came to the fore once again, but this time Aston Martin was a highly reputable brand. It led to Ford coming in for a 75% stake in 1987, only to buy the remaining 25% by 1993. Now, a company as big as Ford obviously came in with a game plan to change the tide for Aston Martin, but Victor was still allowed to rule as chairman of the company. Considering his interests, Victor tried to keep the brand affiliated with sports racing, but the numbers weren't good enough for him to justify his position. With nothing left to offer, Victor willingly relinquished his position in 1991 and Ford took full control of the company. This led to changes in its production strategies and they worked like a charm. Aston Martin ended up producing 700 cars in 1995, which became a personal record for them. By now, the DB range had already been revived and sales were starting to look consistent once again. Ford has been recognised as Aston Martin's most loyal owner as they control the company without any external ownership for around 30 years. There weren't any major issues with production or revenue, and the brand had increased its value to become one of the leading forces in the luxury car market, which was worth billions of dollars. The added comfort allowed Ford to announce a return to racing in 2003 and eventually led to the creation of Aston Martin Racing in collaboration with ProDrive. Together, they focused on the DBR9 program responsible for making the GT class models used for Formula One and other racing competitions. Chapter 6. Going private, teaming up with Mercedes Benz, and then going public. In March 2007, a group of companies led by ProDrive chairman David Richards managed to acquire ownership of Aston Martin for a whopping $848 million. Ford still kept a stake valued at around $70 million. With this new deal, the focus was to capture the Chinese market, and Aston Martin managed to land a few dealerships after an extended PR campaign where the latest car models would be driven from Tokyo to Istanbul and then further to London. This was followed by multiple investments and partnerships, but the most prominent of all was the strategic collaboration with Mercedes Benz in 2013. The deal basically allowed the next generation of Aston Martin cars to be made with the Mercedes Benz AMG engines and electrical systems. It was a good look for both brands, and Mercedes ended up increasing its equity stake in the company slowly and gradually. What followed was a period of integrated marketing and PR campaigns as Aston Martin also sought to engage its female market. It got off to a good start by presenting itself as a luxury lifestyle brand and even collaborating with fashion houses like Hackett. In 2018, Aston Martin was valued at almost $6.5 billion, and this prompted the board to list it as a public company named Aston Martin Lagonda Global Holdings plc under the London Stock Exchange. This helped boost its financial standing as it attracted bids from Canadian billionaire Lawrence Stroll, Swiss billionaire Ernesto Bertelli, and even the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund. So what could possibly go wrong? Chapter 7. Aston Gate. In November 2020, Aston Martin became part of a massive controversy due to its involvement in the infamous greenwashing campaign in the UK. The primary accusation was that the company was promoting misinformation about electric vehicles by funding a greenwashing report. They weren't the only ones involved though. Bosch, McLaren and Honda were some of the other prominent names on the list. However, because of the direct ties between Aston Martin and the PR agency involved with the distribution of the report, this controversy was given the name Aston Gate by all the journalists covering it. So why would all these brands commit self-sabotage? Well, it all started when the UK Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson, had made an announcement stating that the sale of all combustion engine vehicles will be stopped from the year 2030 in a bid to promote electric and hybrid vehicles. This was basically a death warrant being signed without consent, so Aston Martin and the other brands stepped in and spread their greenwashing report like wildfire. The key takeaway from this report was that the process of manufacturing electric vehicles was extremely CO2 intensive. The numbers had apparently stated that an electric vehicle would have to be driven for at least 80,000 kilometers in order to offset the energy and carbon used up in its production process. The report, titled Decarbonising Road Transport, There Is No Silver Bullet, was broadcast all over the popular newspapers such as the Daily Telegraph, the Sunday Times and Metro. This caught the attention of Michael Liebrecht, founder of the New Energy Finance, which was later taken over by Bloomberg. Together with a Dutch senior advisor named Orke Hoekstra, Michael was able to expose the report for using inaccurate information and linked it to a PR firm called Clarendon Communications. The duo also identified Aston Martin and Bosch as two key clients for Clarendon and published this information immediately. Eventually, Clarendon was exposed as a puppet PR firm with a bogus board of directors. Chapter 8. Moving forward. With a diversified portfolio and integrated management board, let's just say that bankruptcy number 8 isn't something that they should be worrying about. After all, Aston Martin is still a modern symbol for class and elegance. Please like, share and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and tap the bell icon below to get notified whenever I upload another one. Take care and stay safe.